What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have a lot to talk about today as we are looking at some potentially very big winter weather threats for the next week or so. And in this video, we're going to be kind of talking about two main things that are going to pertain to that. The first thing we're going to be talking about is a potential winter storm that's going to be impacting much of the Midwest, much of the northeastern United States, Great Lakes region, as well as parts of the Great Plains. And the other thing we're going to be talking about, and matter of fact, we should probably talk about this first, now that you think about that, is the extreme cold that's going to be coming down through much of the eastern United States. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into it right now. So here's the situation that we have for you right now. We're a few days out from any of this happening, but because of all the stuff that's going on with it, I figured it would be something interesting that we should talk about and take a look at. So let's go ahead and start with the temperatures. And the main area of concern I'm looking at is, of course, the eastern United States. But you got to watch how these temperatures are going to behave. They're going to be going all the way down to Florida in the next few days or so as we start to get towards the early part of next week. We're going to start seeing some very cold temperatures, probably by around January 8th or so, based on what we're seeing according to both the Euro and the GFS right here. And this has been a very consistent trend over the last little while. And while we're at that, I want to take a look at kind of what's driving this in the upper levels, just to kind of see what's going on. Let's start at 850, start with the wind speed right there. That kind of helps explain the culprit. There's a pretty big trough that's going to be over much of the United States. There's going to be a pretty big trough going on there that's going to be driving a lot of this Arctic air down from Canada as well. If we go ahead and go even further up to 500, it becomes a bit more pronounced. There is a bit of a jet streak over here for parts of the southeastern United States. That's going to help drive some more Arctic air down. You also have this positively tilted trough over here in Nevada, Utah, and Idaho over there. That's going to be pretty relevant in the next little while. But ultimately, what I'm noticing is it's going to be part of a pattern it's going to be kind of in tangent with the winter storm that we're seeing right here. We're going to see a Colorado low develop, and then with that cold front, as well as all the Arctic air from Canada, it's going to be pushing all the way down. As you can see, there's this huge cold front right here through Arkansas, through parts of Texas, through parts of Louisiana at this current point as it continues. And it digs down and pushes through so much of the southeastern United States, through Georgia, the Carolinas. Let's go ahead and show you some of these temperatures right here. And this is for Wednesday the 8th. 45 degrees in Miami. That is something you do not typically see for that far down in Florida. And even in the Florida Panhandle, we're expecting below freezing temperatures right here across Georgia. We're seeing temperatures in the 20s that morning. Same with South and North Carolina. Wind chills are going to be even cooler than that. From what I've been hearing from several of my guys in Storms United, as well as some people I've been talking to who live in Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, those areas right there. So we're going to have to pay attention to that as well. So yeah, that's what we're looking at. But it's really that cold front that really pushes all the Arctic air, and then you have that trough that's going to be situating over the eastern United States that allows for this cold air to situate. But take a look at what we're seeing even in the Midwest. We're seeing temperatures get down to the single digits at night. And not just that, we're also seeing these temperatures remain in the single digits throughout the day and then get down potentially to the negatives according to the European. Granted, this is too far out. This is a bit early for that. But this is just something to consider, and I know temperatures are a lot easier to forecast than, say, giant storms, per se, and the patterns have been pretty consistent. Let me go ahead and show you the GFS. Generally a pretty consistent pattern with this through the 0Z GFS as well, showing similar situation to what we're seeing, especially in the southeastern United States over here, and this massive Arctic blast through much of Minnesota, Wisconsin, through much of the Midwest and northeastern United States. That's something we're going to have to pay attention to, and that's going to be a threat for some pretty big cold going on with potentially wind chill advisories, wind chill warnings with this. If the winds are strong enough with that, and that's something we're going to have to pay attention to, and especially as this winter storm passes and you start seeing a bit of a high pressure system moving over here, it's not going to particularly be that easy to get rid of. We have a high pressure system moving into the United States, moving through the Great Plains and entering in the Midwestern United States. And it's going to keep all of this Arctic air near the surface. It's going to keep it all across here for the next little while. And yes, we're getting into fantasy land by that point. But I would say starting around I'd say Sunday, around Sunday or so, for much of the Midwest, and then starting going into Monday and Tuesday for much of the southeastern United States is when you're going to start seeing this Arctic blast right here. So let's go ahead now and talk a little bit more about this potential setup for a winter storm, because on top of all this Arctic cold, you're going to have a snowstorm for much of the Midwest, much of the northeastern United States. That's going to be impacting it quite a bit. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the parameters that we're taking a look at. Let's go ahead and start with the 500 millibar. The reason I am showing you guys this is generally what we're looking for is, are we looking for the trough angle? Are we looking at the trough itself? Are we looking at a ridge? And in layman's terms, basically, if you see a trough, expect colder temperatures. And a trough is pretty much when you see this whole jet streak digging down. If you see a ridge, expect warmer temperatures. A ridge is when you see this jet streak digging up. It's kind of like wavelengths a little bit. You have the trough kind of going down like this. You have your ridge going up like that. It's kind of one big wavelength, I would say. And depending on which part of the wavelength we are in will depend on how cold the temperatures will be and how bad the weather will be. Troughs are also very important, mind you, for severe weather development as well. But we will get into that part of it later, because I do think there might be a potential for some severe weather in the southeastern U.S. But before we get into that, what are we looking at? We're looking at a general trough setup around 500 millibars in the atmosphere. If we go down to 850, it's showing a similar situation, as well as giving us a closed low already by that point, going through much of Illinois in the Midwest and those areas. As well, look at some of these wind speeds. We're looking at winds of potentially 50 knots, mind you, at 850. That's pretty powerful, and that's not a small number at 850. 925, we're looking at 50 knots as well. Not a small number. If we go ahead and even showing you the surface and all that stuff, we're going to have to pay attention to. Now, what's going to be driving this? Let's go ahead and pull up the GFS over here, because that'll give us a bigger picture of the precipitation type and what's going to be this system, and what's going to end. So excuse me for that. Where's the system going to develop, and how is it going to develop? Because that's going to be very key for who gets the most snow and who gets the most impacts. So here we go. Taking a look at it, it's going to be your classic Colorado low. Starting around January 4th or so is when this system's going to be moving into the Rocky Mountains, moving through there. Generally, what happens is as a system exits the Pacific Northwest and enters the Rocky Mountains, the vorticity around it decreases because the thickness between, say, 500 millibars and the surface goes down, and the thickness between that and the surface, because of terrain, elevation, geography, etc., ends up decreasing, and it also makes the vorticity a lot broader, but it rotates a lot slower in general. Whereas when you decrease the height, the elevation, when you increase the thickness, the vorticity stretches out a bit more and it starts rotating a lot faster. Think of it as your figure skater. The further out she goes, the more she extends her arms and legs. It's going to be much slower. Whereas if you put them all in with the arms and legs, she's going to spin a lot faster. So it's kind of that. It's the same physics right there, and that's generally what we're looking at right here. So that's what we have going on. Then you have huge amounts of snow starting to really organize and develop as it moves through the Rocky Mountains, as it moves into the Great Plains. South Dakota, Iowa, Missouri are going to be likely impacted first. I have been watching the threat for an ice storm for some areas, and for example, St. Louis in particular. We're looking at a little bit of a split right now. Either you're going to get quite a bit of snow with this, or you're going to get quite a lot of ice with this. The rain-snow line is too far to the south for you to get much rain unless models change in the next few days, which generally, considering how consistent they have been so far, I don't see that as a high likely ability. But what I will say is if you guys get a lot of ice, and this is always my opinion, getting a quarter of an inch of ice is worse than getting 6 inches of snow by a long shot. The reason I say that is because ice has no friction to it. So a quarter of an inch of ice on the road, your vehicle is going to be sliding all over the place, and it's going to cause a lot of accidents and all that stuff. It's a much bigger hazard. Ice also weighs a lot more and can potentially down power lines. A quarter of an inch of ice, that's around the threshold where that starts to happen, but it's really a third, 4/10, half an inch of ice where it really starts to be down power lines and those areas right there. But like I said, a quarter of an inch of ice is worse than 6 inches of snow because snow you can somewhat drive in. It's something that you can manage to drive through as long as you have the right tires, you have the right vehicle to do it. Jeeps are obviously the most effective way to do that. I know Subarus can do that as well. Shout out to Subaru, by the way. Also, in terms of ice, you guys cannot drive on that no matter what you try to do, no matter what tires you have, no matter how good your brakes are. Your brakes aren't going to work because you have no friction. That's the simple law of physics right there. If you don't have friction, the brakes aren't going to work. So with all that rambling and all that physics aside, let's go ahead and move on with this right here. Generally, what we're seeing is the system continues to increase in intensity as it moves through Arkansas, moves through Kentucky. This is just one model. Keep that in mind. And then it starts to push more snow into the Great Lakes region, into parts of the northeastern United States. There is a secondary system that low that does develop according to the GFS, and then brings some snow and eventually develops into a nor'easter and moves through there. But considering this is 8-9 days out, it's a little bit more too early to tell type of scenario. But regardless of that, that's the kind of general gist that we're taking a look at right here, the general consensus of what we're looking at. And the snowfall amounts I have seen so far have been quite incredible. Let's go ahead and show you that. The most we can show you right now is the European and the GFS, but they do give a good enough picture as to what we're potentially looking at. Here's the European model right here. The European, once this system starts to organize and get going, we're starting to see a lot of snow across much of the Midwest and the northeastern United States. Granted, a lot of this pre-existing stuff over here is lake effect around Buffalo, around Syracuse, around those areas in New York and Michigan, and in the Upper Peninsula as well. But then you have this Midwestern storm that really rampages through Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, all the way to the East Coast and potentially dumps a feet of snow according to what we're seeing with this map right here. Let's go ahead and zero in to the Midwest right here, the Midwestern region of the United States. The European, in my opinion, is quite a bit aggressive with this. Let's go ahead and just, for context, show you the 12Z from yesterday in comparison. 12Z from yesterday had the storm going completely south of it, whereas the 0Z now has it hitting dead on in Chicago, St. Louis, Indianapolis, Detroit, Toledo, Columbus, Cleveland, those areas. So there is a bit of uncertainty with it, but the synoptic setup of it is relatively the same. So overall, if you do see some variation, keep in mind it's still a little early. I'm only showing you one model run. I'm also going to show you the GFS and the GEM GDPS just to kind of show you how fluid this is and how variable at least the amount of snowfall is, because this is the most important part of it. I understand that. But generally, the European, this early out, is calling for 28 inches of snow at most for parts of rural Illinois. St. Louis getting 20 inches. Chicago proper getting around 8, but the areas in northwest Indiana around South Bend getting up to 20 inches of snow. And then you also have 15 inches of snow in Detroit, and Toledo getting 20 inches, 24 in Cleveland. I'm going to be brutally honest with you guys. Right now, that is a bit outlandish. And yes, this is 10 days out by the time I am showing you this map, so it's easy for me to say, but I would still pay attention to it because, in my opinion, a 12-inch snowstorm is not anywhere close to off the table. And the reason I bring that up is predominantly because of the synoptic setup that I was showing you earlier. So here's the GFS just for context and for comparison. Again, it's much further to the north, so there is some fluidity with this right here, but giving Iowa 19, 20 inches of snow. The Chicago area gets hit more by it, but keep in mind, the reason there's not much snow around St. Louis is because you're getting a lot of ice with this. Let's go ahead and show you the freezing rain accumulation with this. In some areas, according to the GFS, you're looking at over a half an inch of ice. Granted, still early, keep that in mind, but I wanted to show you guys that as we get that. And like I said, the ice is, in my opinion, going to be worse than the snow any day of the week, considering it's going to be moving through Indianapolis, St. Louis, Columbus, those areas, if that model ends up holding. Still early, but I wanted to bring this up. So here's the total snow accumulation. It seems that the GFS is also enhancing some lake effect snow as well for parts of northwest Indiana, western Michigan, those areas as well, which is going to help increase snowfall to over 20 inches of snow in some parts of Michigan in particular. But overall, the bulk of the snow is going to be in Wisconsin, northern Illinois, northwest Indiana, northern Indiana in general, actually, while the areas to the south of it get ice, and we'll go ahead and move on to the northeast and see how this whole system pans out. And as I've taken a look at this, the GFS does want the system moving north of Pennsylvania. The European, if we go ahead and show you that, wants Pennsylvania to get hammered. So you can tell how fluid and how kind of out there this is, because one model is showing New York City getting 20 inches of snow, which I don't think is personally going to happen unless we continue to see this consistent trend. And you have another model missing Pennsylvania and, eastern Pennsylvania entirely with a completely different scenario. So still a lot of fluidity with this, but overall the dynamics and the synoptics are there for a big storm. I'm going to go ahead and also show you the GEM GDPS as well, just to give you even more more context to this. Yes, the GEM GDPS is also showing this snowstorm happening, but not nearly at the intensity of the European and GFS. Yes, it's still going to be a lot. They're seeing 8 to 10 inches of snow through much of the Midwest, and you are seeing a lot more lake effects and Appalachian snow in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and areas around the Great Lakes. But overall, the one thing I am looking for is consistency. Is this storm going to happen? Are the models showing it over and over, or is this a one-time event? Time and time again, the models have been pretty consistent with the snow event, and this is something that we're going to have to pay attention to as we go into more of this week and then into the weekend. One last thing I do want to check, though, before we get off of this video, is the severe weather threat. Is there going to be a potential severe weather threat in the south as that cold front moves through? Because, yes, I got a lot of criticism last winter for focusing too much on the snow and not enough on other elements. So we're going to go ahead and broaden our perspectives with that, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at the potential threat for severe weather with this. So generally, what we're seeing with the GFS here is simulated reflectivity. Yes, it's a bit nuanced with it, and we're not obviously going to rely on it all at once. But I do want to take a look at I do want to take a look at the CAPE. I do want to take a look at the wind shear and see what we're working with. Right now, the GFS is a little bit iffy with the amount of CAPE that we're taking a look at, convective available potential energy. That's what it is. Yeah, there's not really that much CAPE for this to work with, but keep in mind this might obviously change. Severe weather is much harder to predict than winter weather, because severe weather is that much more mesoscale compared to winter weather, which is more synoptic scale. Whereas you can look at troughs, you can look at ridges, and you can get a general idea. Whereas severe weather relies on a lot more aspects, such as, okay, what's the CAPE? Is there wind shear? All that stuff. So ultimately, right now, there's not that big of a severe weather threat from what I'm seeing. But I do think that if it does happen, considering the strength of the cold front that is forecasted by these models, a straight line wind threat is going to be the main threat from what I'm seeing. Sure, you could see a couple tornadoes hypothetically here, and this is way out there, obviously. But my main concern would be straight line winds if you look at severe weather for next weekend. So ultimately, there's two things you got to take a look at with this. Number one, you got to look at the Arctic temperatures. That's what we were paying attention to, and that's what the reason we covered that first was because it's going to pose a big threat, and it's going to be very problematic for a lot of people, especially in the South, that have never dealt with these temperatures or are not used to them, like some people are in the Midwest. And the other thing we should look at is the synoptic stuff and the snowstorm in particular with that. So we're going to have to watch and pay attention to all of those as we get more information for you. But right now, just wait for more information. If you want to start preparations, I would start after the new year. Enjoy New Year's Eve. Enjoy New Year's Day, even though, in my opinion, that is the most boring holiday of the year. But enjoy New Year's Eve. Enjoy going into 2025. You have nothing to worry about right now, but the weekend after is when you should start looking. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. It helps us out and helps us get more people engaged with weather. If you want to come hang out with us and analyze this system further, we have a lot of people at Storms United that could help you out and talk weather with. And we also have our own analysts at Storms United that can always answer your questions that you have for us. Be sure to join our Discord server. Link to that will be in the end screen. Shout out to Daniel as an official sponsor of the Pat's Path Predictor Patreon. If you want to support the channel directly, be sure to join the Patreon. It's the first link in the description down below. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.